Hey everyone, Mrhappy here, and in this video, going to be sharing with you a short interview I got to do with Naoki Yoshida at the most recent North American media tour for Final Fantasy XIV. Apologies in advance. I actually didn't ask very many questions, and I think my questions are kind of subpar at the best. There were other people there, and I had heard some of the questions others were thinking of asking, so I did cut a lot of things out of this. I expected also to have better questions after the initial morning presentation plus a little bit of playtime, but I really didn't. I only had, I think, maybe one good question here, but luckily there's so many interviews with so many great questions and probably some good answers out there, fingers crossed at the very least. So be sure to look around and see all the interviews, and maybe there'll be like a compiled post or something on Reddit covering all this stuff. But I'm tired now, I was tired then, so let's get to it. So I only asked 4 questions. I definitely could have gotten away with 5 or 6, but after the 4th question I decided that I needed a break. Yoshida could probably use a 15-20 minute break with me cutting our interview short, so I actually decided to do that. The first question I asked was really just one out of curiosity. After getting to play around with some of the skills, I noticed that like Paladin's Gap Closer wasn't until level 72, but yet other jobs maybe had skills that were adjusted or moved to earlier levels. A big example is the tank stance is being level 10 now, and some of the other skills being lowered, like gravity being lowered to level 45. So they were very clearly capable of adding skills to the lower levels, but they decided to wait until past level 70 to add Paladin's Intervention. And a handful of other jobs got skills that didn't happen until after that point too, some AoE rotation abilities. So I simply asked, why? Why did some jobs have to wait all the way till the new levels to get access to some of their, more basic things that they didn't have before, whereas some jobs, they went out of their way to definitely make sure they were available at earlier levels? The answer I got was mostly about the job's core identity and how much that individual skill was actually pertinent to it. When it comes to Paladin, their level 1 to 70 is pretty representative of a Paladin. There wasn't really much of an identity that needed changing there. So Intervention was an ability that they could wait till level 72 to introduce. And besides, ultimately, you're going to have all these abilities at level 80 anyway. Whereas some other jobs, they may have decided, for example, with Gravity, that this was a long time request of making sure it was available before level 50. Holy was already level 45, so it just made sense to make the healer AoE skills all level 45. There were a few other examples, but the general gist of it is, if it was very important to the core identity of the job, they made sure it was available at earlier levels, and if it was something that was just a fun thing that they were adding as a new skill, then it didn't really matter if they waited until the higher levels in order to make it available. He also made sure to comment on the side that, we had already gotten some playtime, and that while I was specifically talking about Paladin, Gunbreaker, when you go through their identity and the levels for their skills, it should feel quite different. And this statement definitely makes more sense with that context, but it was just something I was a little curious about. I'd say that the second question I asked was really, the big question, and the 4th question was pretty good as well. The second question, I simply asked, are they increasing raid healing or party healing that's going to be required for content? This initially sparked because during the initial presentation, and if you've seen the 51st live letter, you notice that they said they wanted to push all the healers into a pure healer role. Now, we know from some other translations and from some other interpretations that it doesn't necessarily mean they want healers to only heal. It just means that they want to make sure that their healing capabilities are enhanced and very pronounced. But as I was playing through the dungeon that was available, when I did it with Trust take a little bit less damage, so it wasn't really that bad. But when going through with players, it felt like the damage was much more noticeable. It felt like the bosses in the dungeon that we got to play were, doing a little bit more persistent AoE damage, or larger chunks of AoE damage more frequently, and they still had their tank busters, still their mechanics. And so I brought it up, I said, hey, it seems almost as if with the new abilities and with the increased amount of AoE that's happening in even just this simple 4-player dungeon, it seems like the dev team is moving us into requiring more healing in encounters. And so I just asked him to comment on it, is that an intended change that the developers are making? He actually stated that he was shocked that I had already determined that based on the little bit of playtime that I had. And he wanted me to, present his answer very carefully, because it was something that I interpreted, but it's not something that devs necessarily wanted to be something super pronounced. They don't want everyone to be scared that there's going to be this crazy amount of AoE damage. That's not what they're doing, and that's not what I'm inferring here at all. That being said, he commented that the healers kind of felt lukewarm in Stormblood, at least from a healing perspective. They're just really wasn't much to encourage them to really heal a lot. You know, you throw a couple off global cooldowns, you go back to DPSing. That's how it was before. Now, I'll personally be surprised if that changes too much, but because we haven't seen the actual endgame encounters, it's hard to say that. It's not that they don't want healers dealing damage either. You know, he made specifically sure to note that White Mage's strongest level, their strongest ability, like the core of their new gauge, is an offensive skill. They still want healers to feel like they can contribute to the DPS of the group, but healers should be responsible for keeping people alive, and putting more emphasis on that without going too overboard to scare off new players is something that they were kind of leaning into. You know, it was hard to get an exact answer because they didn't want to just say, yes, we want healers to only heal. That's the answer they don't want me to give off. But just expect more healing. Just expect it. But we'll see how it actually pans out. Now, I also asked about Black Mage and Red Mage in particular, because I said that, you know, some jobs, they got some pretty major changes, and some, you know, they got 1 or 2 abilities added at the end of the rotation or something. And so I asked him, I gave Red Mage and Black Mage as examples, but he pretty much took those as the, I guess, the core jobs that I was asking about. You know, for Red Mage, for example, they didn't get too many changes because they kind of felt that they were just so cohesive that if they added something like too much, or they change it too much, that it wouldn't be cohesive anymore. So just making sure they had some things to cover up things they couldn't do before, you know, with the elemental AoEs, and adding an extra part at the end of the combo, and giving you an option so you don't backflip off of the arena. Those were more important things for the Red Mage. For Black Mage, Yoshida was torn because he's like, you know, that's my main. You know, do we really need a raise? Do we really need raid-wide buffs for everybody? Ultimately, it was decided by the dev team. You know, Black Mage is a job that is a very special place. You know, it is very strong when you know how to play it. And that's really important. On top of that, it's also very easy to tell how you are improving on a pull-to-pull basis as you gain more experience learning Black Mage, and learning how it's supposed to be played, and learning a specific encounter. And those are very unique feeling to the game, and it's something that Black Mage players, when they finally get those big parses, they feel really, really good about it, and they didn't want to compromise that. So they needed to keep a lot of its power in check, so they decided not to give it a raise, they decided not to give it party synergy, and to instead fix some of the frustrations with the job design. You know, the transferring between Astral Fire and Umbral Ice with Fire 3 and Blizzard 3, you know, making it so those don't cost MP, having the instant cast on Xenoglossy to give you a little bit more movement. Those things were more important because now Black Mages have more tools to work with, and they'll still feel really good when they know the fight and when they can pump out all of the proper amounts of DPS. You know, you still have your Sharp Cast, your Sure Cast, your Swift Cast, you got 2 stacks of Polyglot now. So altogether, it should just feel better to play, but you should still feel that same level of accomplishment when you've learned to fight properly for Black Mage. And with that, I moved on to the final question. I could have asked another question after this, but I was just so unprepared that I said, you know, I could go back to recording right now, I suppose. My 4th question was, are they still going to be doing 2 parts for the Savage bosses? You know, the way it was throughout all of Stormblood is the final boss in every Savage tier had this sort of Gatekeeper style boss, and then it had like the real final boss. There are a few issues with that, you know, normal mode, for example, maybe being less exciting. A big example being Sigmascape, where you can't cut off Dancing Mad right before the final part. That just really didn't feel good in normal mode. And so they said that, yeah, they saw actually quite a few issues in the plan of development when it came to doing the double bosses for Savage. For one, when you were actually progressing on it the first time, it was kind of frustrating. You know, you'd get through that first fight, you'd be super excited to progress on to the next one, but you kept getting sent back. It wasn't the same feeling as being sent back a phase. You're sent back a whole boss, and that digs into your timer, and then you have to do that. So it almost like artificially extended the how long it took people to progress through that. And then on top of that, every single week, you're like, I can't wait to re-clear, get my loot. You had to go through this Gatekeeper boss. So while it was a cool thing and they did it, and some people enjoyed it, some people didn't, they're not going to be doing that again. Now, what they didn't do is tell me what's going to be different. They said they are making, and the word he used was a pivot, changing to a different way of making those final Savage encounters being more exciting. I know that Winged Justice back in Midas was really, really cool. You know, a Savage exclusive phase where it's something that, you know, you beat it on normal, the normal mode feels complete, and then Savage mode feels like it takes this like extra leap that pushes you to new levels. I'm hoping that's the route that they take, but we'll see. Who knows what it's actually going to be? Who knows if it won't just be a different boss for the final tier on Savage? There's really no way of knowing. He didn't want to He didn't want to comment on it though. He just said, we will not be doing the same thing. We will be doing something that we haven't done before though. So I'm curious to see how that pans out. That's all my questions from the interview. This is video number 21, and oh man, it feels good because after this, I get to record just an overall thoughts video, and I just get to go nuts. No scripts, no anything. It feels so good to just be going just completely off the top of my head for a video after 20 videos of so much structure and clipping and everything like that. So hopefully you enjoyed these few questions, these few answers. Be sure to check out all the other interviews that everyone else who attended no doubt is posting the same day. And with that, I am going to wrap up this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more information as Shadowbringers rapidly approaches. I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, take care.